Is it too late for this? Well, we need something to tide us over until the eventual release of Chapter 2 of Project Eden's Garden, and I figure that putting my mad ramblings into video form would be one such way. I'm not gonna pretend even half of this will end up true, nor that my insistence on the devs subverting some expectations is like this foregone conclusion or anything. This is merely an order that I think seems possible at the very least. Without further ado, let's see who I think will kick the bucket in Chapter 2. If you know me, you know I love ELOISSE. Like, a lot. She's easily my third favorite character behind Toshiko and JETT, which is why I'm so sad, but also confident that she'll die here. Between both the original Danganronpa, as well as many fangins, Chapter 2 tends to kill a lot of the characters I really like. But of course, that's not the real reason I have her here. Many people seem to think ELOISSE will be a culprit, and it's not really hard to see why. Her talent allows her to not only be physically more than capable of killing someone, but it also lends itself well to an execution. Moreover, her reserved yet occasionally cold nature shows that even if she isn't readily oppositional, it certainly isn't foreign to her. This is even reflected in her animal, the swan, known for being elegant and beautiful, but often aggressive towards people. With all that said, however, I think this level of obviousness makes ELOISSE a red herring. She's such a shoo-in for being a killer that I'd be shocked if they actually went through with it. While it is possible that ELOISSE would be a fitting character for an epic Chapter 3 crash-out, I don't think they'd give it to a character that has already shown some degree of aggression, as those things are usually reserved for more chill characters. Not only that, but between the numerous pieces of official art, as well as their similar attitudes, I think her death could serve as some character progression for Desmond. Maybe ELOISSE tried to kill someone before her death, and Desmond, who had a lot of care for her in particular, is forced to confront that. Personally, I think Desmond is going to last a while, so ELOISSE dying here would start that character arc at, I feel, a pretty good time. There were some other characters I debated putting here, but ultimately, due to the role I believe she'll play in Desmond's development, as well as my belief that she'll be a victim, I think ELOISSE will be the next one to bite the dust. But as for who killed her, let's get the elephant, or owl, in the room out of the way. Everyone thinks this guy is gonna die here, and with a Chekhov's gun like they dropped in Chapter 1, I can't blame anybody for that. But while most think his inability to smell will lead to him being the victim, I personally think it'll actually play a role in his downfall as a killer. For one, I don't think we're going to have two female killers in a row, and I think an execution for a historian would be pretty easy to work with. On top of that, his aforementioned smelling issues, combined with others, like his sleep deprivation, which leads to him falling asleep at bad times, are, in my opinion, things that could potentially point to him folding should there be a motive that promises to cure the blackened or something. I also just don't really see much going on for him in the future, at least in comparison to a lot of the other characters, and he's just a guy I can't picture living past the halfway point. Plus, his notepad could also play a role similar to Mikon lying about the cause of death in Danganronpa 2. Everyone is expecting Ulysses to take notes on stuff, only for his journal to suspiciously disappear and lead to him seemingly being unable to help more. And finally, Ulysses had his rebuttal showdown already. While not fully concrete, especially in fangins and especially in Eden's Garden, it's generally seen that one of the characters who has a rebuttal showdown will die the next chapter. And rather than having a rebuttal showdown to defend himself here, we'll get the series staple of someone else coming to defend him instead. As I said before, I think this chapter's killer will be male, which eliminates Grace and Wenonah, both of whom I already doubted would die this early anyway. Jean is a pretty interesting character, and one I've been pretty unsure on thus far. While he seems like a pretty chill and genuine guy, I've always had that feeling that if given the opportunity, he could become pretty unlikable in a heartbeat, potentially in a very similar vein to Angie in V3. Imagine there's a motive or event that reveals that Jean's crew is dead, leading to him becoming overprotective over the gang, as they become the closest thing to the crew he has left. He restricts their freedom in order to prevent a killing, and basically halts efforts towards an escape because he worries it will lead to another murder. Because of this, I can see Jean being a victim, as well as the fact that he's someone I can see as an easy target. His strength and intelligence have made him a pretty helpful guy both in and out of trials, and I can see a killer taking him out in hopes that it could possibly make finding certain clues harder. Alternatively, I could also see Jean dying in an effort to protect someone else. Maybe after the killer leaves a hint that he ends up finding, dying in place of a classmate. Either way, while at one point I believe Jean would be a killer, I'm pretty confident in his status as a victim now. As for him dying here, aside from the previously mentioned fact of us losing his usefulness, Jean is a guy I don't see surviving, nor dying any later. The devs have stated that Chapter 4 isn't killing a buff character, so that's a no-go, and I can't see someone like him dying in 5 or 6, as those are usually very important deaths, which is a role I just don't see him taking. If Ulysses was the elephant in the room, Jett is the rhino or the hippo. Nobody thinks this guy is going to survive, although his exact status is highly up for debate. Killer, victim, or even mastermind, Jett is a guy who can go down nearly any route. But with Chapter 3 not having a double murder, plus the likelihood of Mark having an arc with him, I think this is just the right time for Jett to go. If he's not the mastermind, I can't see him dying later than this, similar to Jean. It also helps that Jett lends himself well to being a killer. The fact that we can't see his face leads to an unmasking not only being an iconic moment in an execution, but also as a potential motive. There's a million theories on this, from him fearing his body being exposed, to him not actually being the real Jett. I've also seen theories about Mark potentially knowing Jett before the killing game, and Jett either had amnesia from his accident, or is an imposter who isn't doing a good enough job of acting like the real Jett. The revelation of him being a killer would also be a great character moment for Mark, who will either adopt Jett's friendlier side to honor the one guy he had been close with, or make him more determined to help and take on a more active role. Yeah, I'm not too huge on fridging, and I don't want to think the devs will make it that simple, but this is kinda how I see Jett meeting his demise. In general, Jett is just a character that would work really well for something like Chapter 3 Crash Out or Sinister Reveal, as well as development for a character that definitely seems poised to get some. Plus, the game has other comedic characters like Cassidy, Kai, and Toshiko, so it makes sense for at least one of the more comic relief-esque characters to go down here and remind us that they too can be killers. Here's where I go off the rails. All 4 of these guys are ones I can see dying at this point, although I feel like only 3 of them will actually go down here. If I had to really pick, I'd probably say Kai, Grace, and Toshiko. Kai, so far, has been somewhat teased as a piece of development for Damon, as the two seem to be getting slightly attached. As a result, his death can be a huge moment for a protagonist, especially depending on the circumstances behind it. Kai just isn't a character that I think is going to survive this, unfortunately. Grace, while no doubt being an important character with a strong arc, is someone I can see being driven to kill by one motive or another, especially this late in the game when many players might have her cemented in as a survivor. She's also already had a rebuttal showdown, so maybe she could work as a victim too. Winona is a similar case, as so far we haven't seen a ton from her outside of a rebuttal showdown, and as the cast thins out more and more, I think she'll meet her demise. Finally, Toshiko is a tough one, as many fans think she won't die due to being only 14. I not only don't stand by that, but I also think that would be an incentive to make her a killer, for some light shock value, but also to nail home just how evil Tozu is, that he'd happily execute a 14-year-old girl. Plus, Toshiko is designed to be kind of suspicious with her mouth, although many fans would like to believe that it's just a fake out to reveal that she has braces or something like that. If I were to give a rough layout of how I think it would go down, I'd have to say Kai is the one I don't see being a killer. After that, Winona is the one who I think has the best shot at survival here. Between Grace and Toshiko as killers, I'm leaning slightly towards Toshiko, but only slightly. And as for who isn't dying here, well, So Mara is a bit of an enigma for now, especially because she kinda sorta barely did anything in Chapter 1, and still hasn't even had any sort of voice yet. Because of this mystery shrouding her, there's naturally many theories as to her role in the game, with many predicting her to actually be a survivor who betrays Tozu. While I definitely think that's a possibility, I kinda lean towards her being the victim of Chapter 5, giving us a Chapter 5 reminiscent of the one from the first Danganronpa. It could even reference the murder from the prologue too, seeing as she's always shown with an assault rifle, similar to how Kara had one before her murder. But if Mara's dead, then who killed her? Well, my theory on that is up in the air. I think there's always the possibility of Tozu doing it, possibly to tie up a loose end if there's reason to believe that Mara will betray him. Considering how Tozu basically directly incited the murder in Chapter 1, I wouldn't be surprised if he continues to take on some more active roles in the coming murders, especially this one. Think about it. Tozu plays a role in motivating every murder up to this point, but he obviously doesn't commit them himself. So naturally, the students would be conditioned to believe that he didn't do this one, especially if the victim was his right hand. But if Tozu didn't do it, maybe he manipulated someone into it. And in that case, I think it'll be whoever didn't die from the last batch. So say for example, Toshiko doesn't die in Chapter 4. I think she dies here. There's several ways this could go down. Either somebody is a traitor or imposter and had already been working with Tozu, or we get something similar to Chapter 1 again. Alternatively, they could pull a chalky Nanners and have the culprit be an unknowing one. Chapter 5 is sort of the one where you gotta pull out all the stops on the murder. And while this setup has been done before in mainline Danganronpa, and I don't know if the devs would want to follow it, I don't think too many people would complain if they did. Damon is a complete wild card to me. He works as a survivor, he works as a mastermind, and he works as a killer or a victim. I don't think there's any single road I could see him going down, at least this early on. So you can just consider his status as the cop-out rating of undecided. Finally, we reach the people that I think will make it out of this thing, starting with everyone's favorite chill guy, Desmond. As I said earlier, I feel Eloise dying will play a role in his character possibly becoming a bit less passive, and even if not, he just kinda exudes importance, like being the third character to show up in the intro after our main protagonist and tease support. He plays a pretty big role in Chapter 1, with his motivation and being a suspect too. And I think it's clear he's not just going to be some killer or victim. This guy is an important figure, and it's also part of why I personally think that in the event of us getting a protagonist swap late game, that this guy will be the one to step up. He just has that kind of aura to him. Diana is one that I don't think will be too controversial. The game has set up her development and status as a pretty active player going forward. Between her and Grace, I think the latter is the more likely one to die, with Diana having a secondary arc where she comes to respect Grace as she meets her demise, carrying on her will in addition to Wolfgang's. Mark is another obvious one. So far he's been pretty quiet and hands-off, but I think we all know that isn't going to last forever. While I do think there's a possibility of him snapping and becoming a killer, I think the more likely result for his character is that he'll open up around or after the death of Jett, and will kind of go the Himiko route, of not being the most helpful, but still ultimately a changed person regardless. Cassidy is a possible hot take, as I think a lot of people theorize her character will get something super serious, and that the comedic relief is just a temporary thing. I personally don't think that's the case, and I think she'll be a silly goober all throughout who manages to survive, similar to Yasuhiro. Finally, I think Ingrid has a fair shot at making it. Not only does Danganronpa stuff rarely have more than one buff character, but oftentimes they don't survive either. With me being fairly confident that Jean will die, I think that adds to my belief that Ingrid will make it out. Not to mention her ties to Toshiko being some good material to work with for emotional beats. Plus, I think she has that Eloise thing going for her where she almost feels too obvious to end up being a killer or something. And with that, here's the predictions. As you can no doubt tell, it's pretty rough and scattershot, and like I said earlier, I'm not expecting even half of this to be true. I generally say I'm pretty confident in the character's overall roles being somewhat accurate, but the specific orders and chapters are where I'd say there's a lot more room for doubt. Regardless, let me know your personal thoughts below, and in due time, we'll see just how well this video ages.